The superimposed lines exercise is one that is all about teaching students that it is more important that we draw our marks confidently than accurately. Beginners are always quite concerned about making sure their lines fall precisely where they mean them to, and they'll often attempt to achieve this by drawing more slowly and carefully, hesitating, and in doing so, they'll end up with a wobbly line. Basically, in attempting to steer their hand as they draw, they're micromanaging the movement from moment to moment. Every time they catch themselves falling off their intended path, they correct the motion. And every correction adds in turn a new little turn to the trajectory in a mark that's supposed to be straight. Of course, as a beginner, you cannot and should not expect yourself to be able to produce pristinely smooth and accurate lines. We can, however, choose to focus on one first. The fluidity of a line, that is, how smoothly it flows, is a factor that is controlled primarily by how we choose to execute a mark. That means the steps and process we follow in actually making the mark is what determines this attribute. If we draw confidently and from the shoulder, as we've discussed previously, our lines will flow more smoothly than if we draw slowly and hesitantly, when our lines will wobble and become much more stiff. Other attributes, such as accuracy, will improve with practice, although there are other things we can do to adjust our approach to improve that as well, and we'll look at that in a later exercise, when we start talking about the ghosting method. So this actual exercise is fairly straightforward. We draw a guideline with a ruler, and then we attempt to superimpose a new line right on top of it, freehand, about 8 times or so. And feel free to rotate the page as needed. For now, I want you to focus mostly on straight lines, starting with shorter ones, like maybe 2 inches, something that long maybe, and then working your way up. But you can mix some curves in there as well if you like. Here's what it looks like when you've done a whole page. Notice that I worked with shorter lines, medium, longer lines, and a few curves. Although if you don't want to do the curves, that's fine too. There are a few issues we need to look into for when doing this exercise. First and foremost is wobbling. And I want to make sure that this shows up on camera, so I'm going to exaggerate it. But when you're trying to follow a path and you draw very slowly, as previously explained, you're going to end up with a wobbly line. This is because we're choosing to draw in a manner that prioritizes accuracy over flow, and we end up hesitating instead of drawing confidently. So this is a hesitant line. Drawing confidently is a choice, and we can demonstrate that by simply taking a piece of paper and drawing random lines on it as quickly as we can. Notice that these marks don't have any wobbles. They're not necessarily straight, but they are confidently drawn, and they are smooth, maintaining a consistent trajectory. Drawing confidently doesn't mean drawing quickly, but drawing fast does make it impossible to hesitate. So by doing this, you can show yourself that regardless of, a naturally shaky hand, you are capable of drawing a smooth stroke. And that's really the bedrock of everything that we're doing here. The second issue I want you to look out for is fraying. And I'll draw another example of this. I'll draw a couple actually, just to help make the point. So you should already notice how what I did there was very different from what I demonstrated initially. Then this is more correct. So the difference is both of these here have fraying. It's like when you look at the end of a rope and you've got all those little separating threads. That's what I'm talking about. What we want to watch out for is fraying on both the end where you start and the end that you finish. Actually, if you've got it on the end here, it's fine. It's expected that because your lines are going to take off at different trajectories due to, just not being perfect, you're going to end up with a deviation here. There's going to be distances between your strokes. If you were to look really closely at it, they'd stand out even on my own work. But what you want to avoid is having very much fraying at this beginning, because that's something we can control. That occurs when you are just drawing randomly and not taking the time to actually line up your pen at the correct starting point. So if you are seeing fraying at the beginning of a line, like we do here, and not so much here, like there's a little bit, but it's not very significant. If you're seeing this, that means that you're not taking the time to prepare before you execute those marks. So just make sure that you are making those choices, that you are going through the steps one at a time to execute the mark to the best of your ability. You will find this to be a big factor throughout this whole course. The idea that we make choices to position ourselves in a way that increases our chances of making the marks that we want. If you rush in, if you hope for luck to see you through, then your line work will be erratic and messy, as it is here. If, however, you invest your time in your planning and preparation before executing your marks, being conscious of the decisions along the way, you will find that you are capable of far more than you may have expected. Patience and forethought is incredibly important. So that's essentially the core of this exercise. It's going to be to create filled pages like this, where you start out with shorter lines, work your way to longer ones, and you're going over each one 8 times. Don't press too hard when you're drawing. Just, make enough contact so that it actually makes a mark, but you don't need to grind your nib into the page, as that can damage your pen's ink flow. Also, those of you working with ballpoint, because ballpoint is okay for lesson 1 and the box challenge. Lesson 2 is where fine liners really kick in, although if you can have them for lesson 1, that's great. One thing you may find is that your pens may create grooves in the page. That's totally fine. Don't worry about it. Even if your pen is falling into a groove as you draw, that doesn't change the fact that you're drawing with confidence. And that's what the focus is here. Not on being slow and steady, but on drawing confident strokes. Actually, I have got fraying there already, so you get the point anyway. So that's it. I'll bring this up one more time. And so that's also an example of what I mean by a filled page. There's obviously lots of room where you could fit in more, but this is still pretty reasonably filled to me. So try and aim for that.